Good morning. My name is Jim Krantz and I'm the WMS Product Manager at Accellos. This morning we'll be talking about some of the exciting new features we've included in the latest release of AccellosOne Warehouse, version 6.4. Version 6.4 builds on the solid foundation of version 6.3 and its focus on simplification, ease of use, and overall customer satisfaction. Since Accellos was founded, we've strived to deliver stable, feature-rich software that lets you focus on your operation rather than worrying about your warehouse system. With each release, our product team reviews market trends, competitive products, and suggestions from the Accellos community to determine which new features are going to give you the most value and ensure that AccellosOne Warehouse continues to be an industry leader. And in addition to new features within the WMS, we're always looking for opportunities to extend our native functionality through integration with other products in the Accellos suite. The changes we've made in version 6.4 can be divided into three categories: new workspace functionality, third-party logistics extensions, and enhancements to the core WMS. On the workspace side, we've added work centers for orders, receipts, inventory, and tasks. We've added the ability to define your own hold codes, as well as user-defined pivot grids. In the core WMS, we've added support for true decimal quantities and pack sizes. We've expanded the product code and made architectural improvements to label printing and the handhelds. And finally, on the third-party logistics side, we now have the ability to capture user-defined value-added services, and we've added integration to AccellosOne Bill, our new billing engine. So let's start by taking a look at some of the workspace functions that we've developed for the WMS. Now, before we dig into the work centers that we've created, hopefully you guys have already had a little bit of experience working with the workspace interface. In previous versions, we didn't have any native workspace functions for the WMS, but we did dock all of our classic Internet Explorer dispatch functions within Workspace. So you could go in and you could access your sales order grid and your purchase order grid through Workspace, and you'll see I can change the layout of my screen. So in this case, I've got my sales order grid and my purchase order grid open at the same time, and I'm able to work with each one independently and simultaneously. So each one of these I get access to at the same time. This is only consuming a single WMS user license, so the great thing is you can go in and do multiple things. Have your sales orders open with your product report or with your bin details report. All of that can be consolidated, aggregated onto a single screen in Workspace. So even if you're not at version 6.4 right now, if you're running version 6.3, then there's no reason you shouldn't use this interface right now to start to get familiar with it. So let's take a look at the work centers that we've built. And we'll start with the Order Work Center. And what the Order Work Center gives you is an aggregated view of your order information. So this is going to be a replacement for your classic sales order grid. So your information about orders is all going to be available on this single screen. So when we were looking at the legacy sales order grid, we could see our information with the pivots for the different fields that we have for vertical pivots, horizontal pivots, and then we can drill down, click through, and see the order information. So start with the order header information that we have. So that information we have in Order Work Center, all of that information is here. So here's my order header information. The nice thing that we have is we have access to the lines. So as things get allocated, as things get picked, this information will get updated. So we've got our pick lines and we've got our shipment details. All of this is going to be available on one single screen. You don't have to click down and drill through anymore to get at the information. And you can manipulate, you could tailor or customize this screen to your preferences. So we can have header information, addresses, instructions, or even your log. So information from your RF log can be displayed on this one screen. And so as I click through, this is going to get updated for each one of my orders. So like I said, you can tailor this screen exactly as you want and save it with different layouts. So I might have an order management layout, I might have an investigation layout, or just an initial layout that shows different information on the screen. So like I said, this one shows something similar to your classic sales order grid. But one of the nice things that we had in classic dispatch was this grid, the pivot charts that we had, where you could go and you can change the fields and say, well, I want to see my information by date create, and quickly get access to the information, showing us the number of orders in each one of the statuses for my dates. So we've got something similar in the Work Center. So in the Work Center, we've got user-definable pivot grids. So you can go and you can define exactly which one of those pivots are going to be the most meaningful to your operation. So where we had access to every single column in the classic grid, what we've done is we've let you pick and choose and define which ones you want to go and you want to define. So let's take a look at orders by client. You'll get the same information with your process steps as the orders walk through the warehouse. And in this case, I'm looking at the client name. You'll see one other piece of information now on the pivot grid that we didn't have in the classic grids, and that's a color. So we've added a heat map intensity onto these so that you can see quickly, visually, which one is the highest frequency. So we can see that unallocated orders for UPA and NBN are almost neck and neck, 359 to 358. So we quickly can visually identify what the most important or what the highest frequency orders are based on our current pivot. So this is showing me the number of orders in each category. The nice thing about the pivot grid is it also lets me report on other information. So my pivot grid doesn't just have to be the number of orders in each cell like we had in the classic sales order grid. I might want to see the number of units. So I might want to see the number of units on order for each one of my customers. So that might be a more important metric for my warehouse than the orders. So in this case, I'm looking and I can see again with a heat map intensity, which ones are going to be my highest frequency and which status. I can also do something like an average value. So I can show the average value by when the order was downloaded into the system for each one of my clients. So we've gone beyond just looking at the number of orders in order to be able to help you look at, identify which orders you want to start working with. So just like in the classic sales order grid, when I click on one of these columns or click on one of these headers or click on an individual cell, what this is going to do is it's going to filter the information on my sales order grid. So when I click on my ready to wave for UPA, you'll see that everything behind the scenes gets filtered down to UPA. So now these are the orders that I'm going to be working with. Use common Windows functions, use common Windows keys to select multiple orders, to select a single order, so you can use the shift and control and all of the different functions. And then we can apply our order management functions by doing a right click on our sales order grid, or hopefully people are going to start migrating to the common look and feel of Workspace and start using the same functions off of the ribbon bar. Now, as you may have seen earlier, we've got some standard workspace functions that are going to make it even more flexible and easier to customize or tailor exactly what you want to see in your order grids. If you remember back in the classic days, if we wanted to go and change the information on one of our grids, we had to go into the grid, we had to edit If we only had one grid on our screen, we were fortunate we could just select that one, and it's going to list all of the different columns that we have, and then we put in a relative position on where we want that column. So that's how we did it in the old days. In the new way, we can simply right-click on our order header, and it's going to bring up a list of all of the available fields that we have in our order grid. So if I want to add specific information onto my grid, say I want an account number, I can do an account number, my allocation options. All of those are going to get updated immediately and they'll get added to the grid. I don't have to remember which grid I'm looking at. I simply right-click on my header and I add the columns that I want. If I want to move information, let's say that I want to move my client name over beside the pack slip, I don't have to change any numbers manually. I can simply drag that column to the left and it immediately goes left of the pack slip. And I can save this as my current layout, or I can give it a new name. And I can save it as a new layout if I'm doing a different operation. And the other thing that we can do to tailor or localize our experience is translate the screen. And again, this is a standard tool that we have built into all of the screens in Workspace. So if you remember back to the days when you're converting anything in Dispatch in the classic grid, you had to open up the screen, you had to find the entry in the ILS script, the ILS table, and make your manual translation. With this, I can simply click on Translate, and based on the screen that I'm on, it's going to load up all of my different keys, and I can select which ones I want to translate, and then I simply click the Translate button. So I don't have to go off to a different translation service. We've got it integrated with Microsoft Bing, where I can take it from whichever language I'm working on and then convert it to other languages that I have loaded. Using the order grid, it's also easier to find the orders that you want to work with. We've got a search panel. And so we've got a search panel that lets you enter in a number of different header columns, addresses if you want to find orders that are going to a specific destination, even down to the special instructions. And so it's not just an equals in most cases. In most cases, we have a trident search comparison, so you can get equal to, not equal to, starts with, contains. So a lot more flexibility in finding the exact orders that you want to work with. And the other nice thing is we can save them. So if I have common filters or searches that I want to use, you'll see that I've got these ones for location not equal to AB. And that'll further filter my sales order grid. So again, it's easier to find the orders that I want to start working with in order to do my order management, do my allocation, do my waiving. The other thing I can do if I don't want to keep exposing the search panel is I can have my search controls dragged up to the ribbon bar. So I drag my search up to the ribbon bar, so now I can quickly filter my orders without having to lose any of the real estate on my screen by opening the search panel. So the Order Work Center should give you all the functionality that you had to find the orders, do your order management functions as the classic grid, but this should have a lot more flexibility. So you should be able to find the orders easier with the search panel. You should be able to identify the orders easier by using different criteria on your filters. One more thing that we added specifically in the workspace function for allocation was we added the ability to select parameters based on an allocation plan. So you might remember in version 6.3 that we added the ability of creating allocation and waiving templates. And what we could do with those templates was schedule them to run on whatever frequency you wanted. So if I wanted to allocate my Walmart orders every day at the same time, using the same include zones, exclude zones, sequences, I could save those parameters as a template and have it execute automatically. Somebody suggested that we also take that and say, well, let's take the unattended waiving, unattended allocation concept a little further and just have it so these can preset parameters. So if you have different parameters for different sets of orders, so you may allocate your Walmart orders from one zone, you may allocate your UPS orders first thing in the morning with a set of parameters that are going to go from the cross-stock zone, maybe. You can save all of those parameters into plans, and you'll see that as I select each one of them, my include zones, exclude zones, or any other parameters on this screen are going to be updated. So we've got the same type of work center for receipts. So your receipt work center, configurable, you can change your layout, you can expose the log information all on a single screen, aggregated receipt information. This is going to replace your purchase order grid in your classic dispatch. So take a look at the inventory work center. And your inventory work center is a newer concept. Inventory Work Center is going to combine your product report with an inventory report. So we're showing all of the places in the warehouse that can contain this product. And you'll see I've got my layout set to be just simply inventory. All of the other information that I have on my screen has been moved off to the side. So let's go back to the initial layout. And we'll take a look at my initial layout and see the information that I have on my aggregated screen. So I actually save this as the initial layout. What we can have is we can show allocated lines. So we show the lines that are allocated for each one of these. We could show the open purchase orders for each one. So I've got allocated lines, I've got open purchase orders, as well as I can see the product details, I can see the sizes, I can see information about the bins, and as well as the individual log information for this specific product and bin. So this inventory record. So all of that again is going to be aggregated onto a single screen. If I click on the product, then this is the one place we do have a drill through that's going to pop up the product details for this specific item. So I can get into more information about each one of my items. One of the things we could do on the product report was block or release or hold inventory for inspection. So we've got that ability through the Inventory Work Center, but now it's a concept called updating the hold code. So I can go and I can update the hold code for the inventory that I have selected. So one or more inventory records. These are user definable hold codes. So now we don't just have the ones that we shipped with the product initially. We can have reserved, blocked, inspection, quarantine. Those are user definable. So you can say which ones are shippable, which ones are not shippable, and we can divide them into different categories for reporting purposes. So you can go in and you can define your own hold codes in addition to the ones that we ship with the product. So you can select and update your hold code through the Inventory Work Center, or you can do it through the handheld, through the direct move reserve stock function. So when we reserve the stock on the handheld, we'll get the same list as we do on the pull down in the Work Center when we're going to be updating the hold code. So just go back to hold codes for a second, and you'll just see the ones that we have defined. So we've got a description that gets displayed when we do our pull down. We have whether it's active or inactive. That's pretty well a standard feature of all the tables that we have in Workspace. If you are no longer going to use something, you should simply mark it as inactive so it'll still show up for reporting purposes. And then we've got whether it's shippable or not shippable. So you'll see that I've got something with a 0 that's available. That was a legacy code that we had. So for historical purposes, we make sure that one's shippable. And then all the rest of my codes that I've assigned are not shippable, which means when I go to try to allocate that inventory, you're not going to be able to ship it. So you could in fact assign a code to inventory and still make it shippable, because then you can use it for category reporting. And you'll know that these ones fall into a category that, although it's shippable, you just keep them distinguished from other pieces of inventory. So that's the order, receipt, and inventory work centers. Those are similar to functions that you had in the classic dispatch. So now let's take a look at the task management work center. This is not something that we had in previous versions. What we did have in previous versions was the ability to go and assign a picker or assign a receiver to specific orders. So you still have that functionality. You can go and do that through each one of the work centers manually. But the nice thing about the Task Management Work Center is it gives you an overall picture of the work that each individual has. So you'll see that Brandon has just picks assigned, but I could go and I could assign unassigned receipts simply by taking them and dragging them over to his user. So let's say we want Brandon to work on a few more receipts in addition to the picks. We can just highlight them and then drag them over to his work. And you'll see that he gets them updated, and now he's going to have aggregated pick and receipt information. And so now we can see that he has picks and receipts that are associated. Now let's say there's too much work for Brandon, or Brandon calls in sick on that day. We can look and see that Brandon has this much work assigned, and if we want to take his picks we'll take Brandon's picks and we can assign them over to another individual. So we see the work that Brandon has. We can take them and assign those over to Anatoly simply by taking them off and dragging them over to Anatoly. And then Anatoly's going to get that work, and you'll see that Brandon is just down to doing his receipts. So this lets you balance the work between individuals rather than just having the ability to go and assign the work through the work centers. So this works for unassigned picks. This works for unassigned receipts. And then we've got a new concept of unassigned moves. And so you can assign moves to individuals. So we've got a new function on the handheld called directed move. And the directed move function was actually created in version 6.3 to tie into reslotting. So in previous versions of the WMS, we always had an incremental slotting report. And what the incremental slotting report would tell you was based on your product velocity and based on how you've defined your bins, A, B, C criteria, which were your highest moving products in each one of your areas and which were the lowest moving products in each one of the areas. So let's say you had a high moving product in what you've designated as a less desirable pick bin. It might be on the floor, or it might be high up where it requires a step stool to get to. Then you may want to move that product to something that's chest or waist level to make it easier to pick. And so if you identify the 20 best and 20 worst in each one of your areas, each one of your zones and your reach codes, just swap those ones out and your picking productivity is going to go up without doing anything dramatic in the warehouse. You just make it easier to pick your products that you're picking more often. So we had that report in for years. What we did in the previous version was we made it so the system created these sets of swap moves in a directed move function. So it would say, take this product that's low moving in a good bin and swap it with this product that's high moving in a bad bin. And all of a sudden your warehouse productivity would go up. So starting in version 6.4, you can assign those moves to individual users. The other place that we can have for directed moves is during receiving. So I can configure my system that if I'm doing a two-step receipt where I'm going to be receiving my product to a receiving dock area and then having that moved into the warehouse, I can have it set so those create a directed move task. So it'll tell a user that there's directed move tasks to do, and rather than just driving the forklift over and looking, they can actually have a formal assignment and directed process to take the goods from the receiving dock and move them into the warehouse. Let's take a look at some of the enhancements we've made to the core WMS product. So starting in version 6.4, the WMS supports up to 6 decimal places for quantity and pack size in any inventory record. You can control decimal precision on a product-by-product basis by downloading the precision through the Product Master VA records from the ERP. The true decimal functionality we've added in version 6.4 replaces the implied decimal functionality that we had in previous versions. So if you're using that to apply a mask to the quantities when they get displayed, you no longer need to do that in version 6.4. We have a couple small restrictions on the true decimal functionality. So you can store an item in decimal quantities, so say 12.5 packs of 1, or a decimal pack size, say 5 packs of 2.2, but it's not possible to store inventory with both a decimal quantity and a decimal pack size. So something like 12.5 packs of 2.2 is just not accepted. If you have inventory stored in decimal pack sizes, it's only going to be allocated to sales orders that specify that same decimal pack size to pick. So if you don't specify the decimal pack size on an order, then you'll need to replenish the inventory to change the pack size into a whole number. In version 6.4, we expanded the product field to 100 characters, and we've expanded the extended product field to 150 characters. The extended product field is the field that contains the product number, any attributes like lot numbers, and as well as the client name if you're in a third-party logistics warehouse. Most of the ERPs we deal with and our integration partners were telling us that the ERP support up to 50 characters for their product field, so we were always a little bit shorter than what they did. So we've expanded that now to 100 to hopefully take care of any future considerations we need. On the handheld, if you're using a Telnet handheld, you know that you can only display 8 by 20 characters, so 160 characters on your handheld. So on the handheld, we only display the first 20 characters of the product. Otherwise, we'd be losing all of our real estate for the actual functions we wanted to perform. So on any screen where we do have a product number or an extended product number, we've added a function key called Show Product, that if you press that, it'll pop up a screen and it'll show you the entire 150 character extended product field. In version 6.4, we added multi-threaded wave label printing. So you can configure up to 8 print queues to print labels when sales orders are waived from Workspace. So what multi-threading means is each queue operates independently. So each printer is printing against its own queue of wave labels. So if one label printer starts printing, you don't have to wait for that printer to finish before your next one can start generating labels. So this is going to be extremely useful for customers that are printing large numbers of labels, say UCC retail compliance labels, where let's say you have to do 4,000 or 5,000 labels for each customer. You're printing out 4,000 JCPenney labels. All of those will come out. Historically, you had to wait for those to finish printing before you start generating your target labels. Some of our larger customers, they call this like a label dance, where they had to time it just right to make sure that each person could get their job started. So with version 6.4, you no longer have to do that. Each dispatcher, each person responsible for the retail client can have their own label printer, and when I wave my 4,000 orders out, they're going to start printing immediately, regardless of what other people are doing for their customers. We've added the ability to parse complex barcodes in receiving. So when we're adding inventory through receiving, or we're adding inventory through a non-PO receipt miscellaneous adjustment, we can scan a barcode that contains multiple pieces of information. And if we've extracted the information from the barcode, we're not going to prompt the user to do that. So these complex or long 100, 150 character barcodes are getting to be more prevalent. So you'll get a barcode that might contain the product number, the lot number, the expiry date, the weight, maybe the license plate. So all of that information can be contained in a single barcode. And when we're scanning it in receiving, then I can configure the system so that it can extract that information. So we scan it once when we're prompted for our product number, and if we've extracted the lot number, if we've extracted the quantity or the pack size or the expiry date or license plate, we're not going to prompt the receiver for that information because we already have it in the system. We've made a few architectural improvements to the handhelds as well. As part of our cloud initiative, we've added support for secure telnet transactions and secure web transactions. So that means you don't need necessarily a VPN pipe to keep your transactions from your warehouse and the cloud secure. We've rewritten our multi-threaded telnet handheld logic, so you no longer have to have special configuration to go in and do multi-threaded handhelds. That's going to be native in your handheld engine now. So if you were using it in the past, you knew that that was going to prevent each handheld from getting stuck behind a big job. So say there was a large label printing job, you're doing maybe carton content labels to do your retail compliance, so you get stuck behind 4,000 or 5,000 label print job. That would kill the other handheld users if you're not using a multi-threaded environment. So like I said, previously you had to go in and configure that specially. Now it's all native, so you should never get stuck behind another handheld's job when you're using 6.4. We've enhanced our handheld user interface so that you can run a combination of handhelds in the same environment. So let's say you've got some new handhelds and you want to start using the new graphical interface. You can use those in conjunction simultaneously with your telnet handhelds. So in previous versions you had to choose one or the other, which meant you had to go with telnet until everything was converted over. Now in version 6.4 you don't have to do that. It's going to detect what kind of session you're running on your handheld and make the display accordingly. One of the things we've done in Workspace is set it to automatically reset or reload your handheld configuration settings when a user presses the reload configuration button from the ribbon bar in Workspace. So previously you had to go in and do reload setup on the RF-based console if you made any kind of a configuration change through the web, through Classic Dispatch or through Workspace. So again, as we move to the cloud, you're not going to have access to go in and do those functions on the server, which means you're going to have it set automatically. So when you go in and make those configuration changes, when you make a rules change, you don't have to go back and do any kind of forced setup on the RF-based console to get those changes propagated. They're going to happen automatically starting in version 6.4. And along the same lines, we've added a new scheduled task to create the inventory, the stock count records. Again, that was on a legacy function we had called upload inventory on your RF-based handheld console. So there was no way to schedule it to happen automatically. It was all just user initiated. So now we've moved that over to our standard schedule task functions, and you can go in and set this to run on whatever frequency you want, or you can still run it on demand simply by going into Workspace and accessing the function rather than having to go to the RF-based handheld console itself. In version 6.4, we added the ability to modify the sort sequence of the picks. So in a standard pick sequence, we're going to direct the picker in the optimal path through the warehouse, the shortest walk distance. We're going to use things like the zone, the beeline, the bin, in order to make sure that it's the optimal walk. Oftentimes, customers want to sort the sequence by, let's say, weight. So if you're doing a cartonized pick where we've split off the products into each carton that we want to contain each product, you might want to pick the heaviest items first so that they're going to be at the bottom of the carton rather than gathering all of the items and then doing a kind of a repack later. So let's say we're doing a split case pick, we could sort our pick sequence by weight and it'll direct the picker in a less optimal path for picking, but it'll be the most optimal path for packing. So what that means is you maybe only have to handle the goods once rather than handling the goods twice. So it's just a balance of where you want to optimize, whether it wants to be the integrated pick to final carton or whether it's going to be on the gather. So you can do different sorts for regular picking, batch picking, split case picking, and order picking. So each one of those you might have a slightly different way that you want to direct the picker through the warehouse. So you can do that configuration. And as well, you can have different sort sequences for forward and reverse picking, which means you can essentially define two different methods, two different sorts that you need for each one of your picking methods. So some of the fields we can use for pick sort sequence, we can use the zone, the bin, the product, the pack size, pack slip, the order sequence number, store number, special instructions, quantity to pick, the weights. That's where I think the biggest use is going to be, using our product weight or the total weight for the pick line and going to sort the sequence in heaviest to lightest. And then we've got some of the top suggestions from the Accellos community. The first thing was adding support for attributes in ASN receiving. So ASN receiving was something we added a couple versions ago, and what that lets you do is receive in a single scan. So you'd scan a license plate or an ASN number that was provided by your supplier. So the supplier says, expect these products on this pallet, on this ASN, and depending on your vendor compliance, your relationship with the vendor, you might trust them enough to say, fine, that's good. I'm going to scan all of those things into my inventory based on the information that you sent me, most likely electronically. Historically, previous versions, you could never support lot tracked items, expiry date items through ASN receiving. So in version 6.4, we extended the functionality. So now you can have attribute products received through ASN receiving. If any of you are printing license plate labels through receiving, in previous versions a license plate label was simply that. It was a barcode with a human readable, unique number that would identify the pallet. So it would just be a strict license plate to say, this is the number of the pallet. For some of our customers that are doing single item pallets, so they're just receiving cases onto a pallet, but they still want to give it a unique identifier, we can add more information to that license plate. So maybe you want to know the purchase order that it came in on, the vendor number. Again, if it's a single item, you can do the product, the description, the quantity on it. So you can just make it a little more detailed of what you print rather than just having, say, a 2x4 inch license plate label. You could do a full 4x6 inch detailed label for your license plate. It's now possible to control over-receiving by product. So in previous versions, over-receiving was a global percentage. So you would set a percentage and say, I'm allowed to not over-receive, I'm allowed to receive 10, 20, 30%, or I'm allowed to have unlimited over-receiving. You can now control that on a product-by-product or even an order-by-order basis by sending it down as a product master, VA download record, or as part of your purchase order detail line, your RD record, to say that for this specific item or line, I'm allowed to over-receive a certain percentage. So you may say that for small items, I'm allowed to over-receive 10 or 20%, but for larger items, say you're going to be receiving a tractor, you might not want to have any over-receiving. So version 6.4 gives you the flexibility to say item by item, I'm allowed to over-receive or I'm not allowed to over-receive. We've added 25 user-defined fields to each of our sales order header, sales order detail, purchase order header, and purchase order detail records. These are specifically for EDI. That was the idea behind it. So EDI sends in messages, they send in data that's not really WMS specific data, but it comes down with the order so that we can echo it back in our pick confirmation and our receive confirmation records so that it goes back up to the ERP, because they don't really have a repository for the electronic information. It just comes in as the EDI document down to the WMS. So we store the data for the EDI and then we send it back out so it can get populated on the required fields going on the outbound EDI. So like I said, there's 25 new ones on the PHPD RHRD. We restore orders to the original state when they're suspended or unsuspended. So when an order is being picked and we suspend it, we return it back to being picked. So in previous versions, we would lose a couple of the flags and it would go from being picked and all of a sudden it would be waived. So you couldn't track exactly where an order was. So we've cleaned that up. We've added archiving and purging of the upload table. So this is, the idea is it can be used for troubleshooting, it can be used for research. So normally when we put something into the upload table from the WMS, we're done with it. So the integration is going to pick it up, it's going to mark it as uploaded, it's going to delete it. But some of our integration partners requested that maybe we could hang on to that data for a little bit longer. So rather than deleting it, they'll mark it as uploaded by the integration, and then we've got some standard functions to move it over to an upload archive table, and then over time in our daily log script we go and do some cleanup and we can purge it out so that the file doesn't grow infinitely. We've standardized some of our terminology. So if any of you have used the nuke function in the past, it's now called delete. So our nuke order and nuke line messages are called delete SO, delete line. Sales orders, we're standardizing to orders. Purchase orders are receipt. Delete PO is delete. Complete PO is complete. Suspend PO is suspend. Unsuspend PO is unsuspend. And release orders, release receipt. So we're just trying to standardize across the Accellos products. If any of you have run product reports that show inventory in previous versions, you may have noticed that there were some pound system bins. And starting in version 6.4, we've eliminated these bins. The majority of our customers that did see them in previous versions asked us to change the SQL so that they were suppressed and they never saw them. The idea behind the pound system bins was to offset some transactions, some picks and receipt transactions that occurred in the WMS, but they weren't uploaded to the ERP. So theoretically, somebody could run a report against our inventory table in the WMS, and it should match what they had in the ERP. But unfortunately, it just led to confusion because there's still unposted transactions. So if we would upload a pick, it would be out of our offset, our pound bins, for the offsetting transaction, but it would still be in the upload table. It hasn't been posted. So it would still show up in the ERP inventory. So again, there'd be a discrepancy, and people would come back and say, well, it's not supposed to be a discrepancy because of all these pound bins, and it would lead to more investigation and support where it truly is an unposted transaction. It's perfectly accepted. So we've removed those. We've removed the IO load, all the read and write that we were doing on the SQL behind it, and I've created a new net inventory report that's going to show as close as we can the net WMS inventory based on the inventory we have in the system. We take away and add receipts and orders that have been processed in the WMS but they haven't been uploaded. Same thing for adjustments. And then if they're using a SQL based upload and download, we'll actually go and look for receipts, orders, and adjustments that we've uploaded but we haven't posted. And the same thing on the download side is any computer adjustments or VA records that affect inventory coming from the ERP. Although we don't recommend people do that, it still goes and looks for that information in those tables to try to give you one number that shows you this is what your inventory should be, and in most cases it should match what you have in your host system. And then a few more small things. We've added the option to return stock to transit when you unpick a carton. So previously we tried to put it back into the bin. If you're using dedicated bins and you reuse that bin, then it can't complete the transaction because it can't put the inventory in the original bin. So we're going to recommend that you put it back to transit and then use a direct move to move it into the bin that you want. If you're using license plates, then previous versions forced the picker to pick the exact license plate that was allocated. So if you're storing multiple pallets in the same bin, I might allocate one that's not the easiest to get to. So in previous versions, you had to get that one that I allocated. In this version, if it's the same product and it's the same quantity, so it's a uniform license plate, we'll let the picker override the one that we've allocated. And that's, of course, unless you've specified it from the ERP. So if the ERP says that you must pick this one, then we can't let the picker override. We've restored the case picking function that was available in version 5.4. So this is another option that you can set from your picking configuration menu. And what this does is the picking method defaults the quantity to 1. So you're going to be doing a case pick. You scan your label and it's going to default 1 case, and it's going to prevent the picker from scanning that label more than 1 time. So if it really is going to get stuck on the side of a case and push down the line, you're not going to be using that label multiple times, so we prevent the picker from scanning it more than once. We've added the ability to consolidate sales orders when they're waived. So if you have sales orders that are going to the same customer, the same ship to destination, there's an option to consolidate them at waiving, so we pick them as if they were a single order. So that was previously restricted to the advanced allocation module, and so now we let you have that in all versions. And we've added an option to control whether the system switches to product picking after the last item is batch picked, or whether we stay in batch picking. So we have some customers that have dedicated resources. The picker just does batch picking and then they hand it off to a second individual for them to complete the second step. And some other customers will use product picking and batch picking by the same individual. So this just lets them, save a couple of function keys at the end of the wave. The last thing that we'll look at this morning are some of the extensions we've made specifically for third-party logistics warehouses. Everyone should be familiar with the RF log table that we have in the WMS. And what that has is transaction details on everything that's happened with, in this case, a sales order. We stamp it for sales orders, for inventory, for products, for bins. So most of our warehouses use this for any kind of investigation if you need to go back and look at what happened with an order or a product. Other companies use this for activity reporting, performance reporting, so you can see the number of lines and units and orders that were picked or received in a day. For third-party warehouses, they use this for billing their clients. So it's activity-based billing. When I do something like move in or move out a product, that's going to result in some sort of a charge that goes to the customer. So every time I pick something, every time I receive, adjust, or move. So all of that information gets tracked in the WMS. Historically, the WMS didn't have anything that could bill for those transactions. So we didn't have our own integrated billing engine. So starting in version 6.4, we've added integration with A1 Bill. So AccellosOne Bill, which is our third-party billing engine, where you can go and define your charges and define your contracts and your discounts. So all of that is handled through A1 Bill. What the WMS does is just capture the transactions. So like I said, every time we do a pick, every time we do a receipt, we send that information back up to the billing engine, and then that takes care of all of the charges. In addition to the standard transactions that we have for picking, receiving, moving, adjusting, counting, we've found that third-party operations also have value-added services that need to be tracked, captured, and billed. So in 6.4, we added the ability of defining value-added services through a transaction types table. And so the transaction type table, you'll see, has some standard system transactions like one charge when I receive an order, one charge when I receive an order line, but it also has things like turn pallet, lift pallet, blast, where those are going to be user-defined transactions, user-defined value-added services that when we perform that transaction, we want that to go back up to the billing engine so that the customer can get charged appropriately. So those are defined through Workspace, and then we go and we actually create the transactions through the handheld. So on my handheld, so this is a simulation of our Internet Explorer based graphical handheld, we've got a function called value added services. And in value added services, I choose the client that I'm working on, and then I pick which one of the non-system transactions, which one of the value added services that I've defined I'm going to be performing. So one of our third-party operations, our cold storage, wanted a turkey blast that they do every time it comes in. Other ones just simply want to inspect the goods, maybe wrap the pallet. So if I want to go in and capture a wrap pallet transaction, this can be associated with an order. So it might be something that we want to tie into an order and get charged together with my pick or my receipt transactions. So in this case, I'll just say order 1, 2, 3. It's unknown, yes. What's the product that I'm working with? So you can do product-based billing in the billing engine. So I'm going to say that this is book 311. And how many pallets am I wrapping? How many charges do I want to generate? So I say that 2. 2 wraps have been recorded for this customer and this order and this product. And now, because I've got those defined in my transaction types table, those are going to get sent up to the billing engine when the rest of the standard transactions get uploaded. So we upload our standard activity transactions every time a sales order or purchase order gets uploaded. So on the same frequency that we do our upload for sales orders, purchase orders, miscellaneous adjustments, we're also feeding transactions over to the billing engine. The other thing that third-party warehouses do, they also charge for storage. And so we've created the ability to upload export billing data is something that will send a snapshot of the inventory. So we usually have this set to run once a day. So at a non-peak period, we send up a snapshot of our inventory so that the billing engine can go and look at it, do a day-to-day comparison of what did we have, when did it come in, what do my contracts say as far as storage, as far as any free days go, 30 days included with your first receipt. All of those things are defined outside in the billing engine. What we do from the WMS perspective is just feed it. We feed it all the data. So we feed it the activity transactions that are going through on a day-to-day basis, and then we send up a snapshot of the inventory. Every night we'll send up the snapshot to say, here's what it looked like today, so that you can compare it and make any kind of storage-based charges to the client that we need to. And then the one other big thing that we added for third-party warehouses was the ability to go in and have order entry through Workspace. So we can do receipt order entry and we can do sales order entry through Workspace. If any of you used these versions previously, so in different versions we did have these functions, but this has been significantly expanded in Workspace. So any field that you can send down from an ERP, you can now go in and enter through order entry. So in a typical distribution warehouse, your orders are going to be placed through an order entry desk where the customer is going to send an email, maybe they send an EDI, maybe they call your order entry desk, they create it in the accounting system, create the order in the ERP, and that flows down electronically to the WMS. We process the pick, we process the receipt, so the pick goes back up based on what we fulfilled for the order. Your accounting system is going to invoice the customer for the goods. So that's for goods that you own. But in a third-party warehouse, you don't own the goods. You're going to be billing for the transactions. So you wouldn't be creating an order in your accounting system in some cases. The order may come in through EDI. The order may come in through an Excel spreadsheet, through a fax, and you need a tool to enter the order in the WMS so that we can create the picks, create the receipts, because what we're going to do is we're going to charge them for the transactions of processing those orders, not for the goods themselves. So we have the ability now in the WMS, in Workspace, of going and creating all the different types of orders that we need. So we can create a regular sales order, a regular purchase order. We can create front counter orders, manufacturing orders, promotional orders, RMAs. All of the different types of orders can be created through this one tool. And some of the other things that we have on order entry in the enhanced version that we have in Workspace. So now you can enter, like I said, the special instructions, any user-defined fields that we have, the additional 25 user-defined fields that we just added for all of the different transactions, as well as specifying if you're going to be picking or receiving specific lots, if you're using lot tracked items, or serial numbers, if you're doing serial tracked items. You can enter that information, the attributes, directly through these tools as well. So we've got that on the sales order side for order entry, and then we've got the same thing for receipt entry. So all of the fields that you could download traditionally through an ERP integration, these are all exposed now through receipt and order entry, so you can go and manually enter them yourselves. So at a high level, that's some of the exciting new features that we've added to version 6.4. So we took a look at the new workspace functions, the order, receipt, inventory, and task work centers. We took a look at the configurable hold codes and the user-definable pivot grids. We looked at some core WMS enhancements with the true decimal support, our expanded product codes, architectural improvements for multi-threaded wave label printing, multi-threaded handhelds, and as well as some third-party logistics enhancements, the capturing of value-added services, and our integration to A1 Bill. So I'd like to thank everybody for their attention and have a great day.